All right, another podcast from the Michigan Institute of Athletics in Brighton, Michigan. It's going to be an awesome podcast today where I'm going to be talking to a gentleman who's got an incredible story of overcoming adversity, struggling with addiction, and now he's a successful entrepreneur. So these are the stories I think that can really motivate people, inspire people, and try to, hopefully bring out the best within each other. So right before we get into it, I want to shout out VetLife. VetLife is a 501c3 nonprofit company. It's a company of veterans for veterans. Every veteran faces struggles trying to transition from active duty back to civilian life, and VetLife is there to ease that transition. The easiest way to reach out to VetLife is to do so through Instagram or Facebook, or check out their website at vetlifetoday.org. So let's get into the next episode. I'm joined today by Willie. I'm not going to try to pronounce your last name because if I butcher it on air, it's going to be terrible. How do you say your last name?
Kalousdian.
Kalousdian.
Yes.
Got it. And man, I know you from the MMA scene. That's how we initially met. You were training back in the day. And now you're on the come up in the business world too. And it sounds like you're doing great. We were talking a little bit before the podcast, but for the people that don't know you, let's start all the way from the beginning. Were you born and raised here in Michigan? And let's start to create your story, Willie.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Fraser. So on the east side, and I had two brothers growing up, good family. We were always athletes. So we played baseball, basketball, and football growing up. My dad was my coach in most of our sports. And so we had it was a real tight-knit community. So Fraser's kind of a small town. It's only 4 square miles. And so there was a lot of that small town feel. We grew up going to every single football game and every basketball game for my older brothers. And it was a cool community to be a part of. And so, it was just I've been in Michigan my whole life. I love it here, but I also like to travel quite a bit as well. So,
Would you say you had a really good childhood, like a good upbringing? You're a happy kid, happy family. Were you in sports? What did your life look like as a child?
Yeah, so childhood was awesome. It was like I said, we never really needed or wanted anything. So we were very fortunate growing up. Like I said, my dad was our football coach. He was our basketball coach, our baseball coach, and all of our rec sports. And it was phenomenal. Like I didn't really have any hardships growing up there.
So you had a really active family. I mean, your dad was really involved in your lives. What did your mom and dad do for work?
So my dad was an engineer. He worked for Ford. He worked for a couple of suppliers. And then my mom, she was a small business owner. She ran a daycare out of her house for I think until the time I was like 14 or 15. So they were always right there,
So one of the things you said before the podcast that I agreed with you on is you said, I've been the type of person in my life that when I'm not being challenged by things, I tend to get off track or I get bored or I kind of get rebellious. And I'm the same way. I've been that way my entire life. So let's start to talk about, I think a part of that personality type is the type that falls sometimes into addictions and things like that because we're extremists. We're people that don't just do things, slightly. If you're going to go, you usually go all in. And I'm the same type of person. I'm actually very fortunate that I've always avoided drugs and things like that because I could have gone off the deep end in my opinion. So when would you say your life started to take a shift from like you're crushing it in childhood, you got a good active father, your family's good, you're playing a bunch of sports, things are successful. When does the story start to change?
So it started to shift a little bit. So when I think I was like 10, my dad was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease. So he came down with ALS, and at the time I didn't really understand it. I just knew, Dad's not doing well. I didn't understand kind of the finality of all of it. So watching his regression and decline, he went from, like I said, he was our coach and everything, and then started getting sick, and he lost the use of his hands quite a bit, and then he couldn't really walk as well. We'd have to help him, and then he was in a wheelchair, and so watching that regression over time, it just kind of, it went on for about 5 years. So watching that, like, it just kind of became like, oh, Dad, that's just how Dad is, and it didn't really register as, I didn't think that it affected me as much as it did. And then he passed away when I was 15, so I was a freshman in high school. Shortly thereafter, I started losing a little bit of interest in sports after that, and it was just, there was kind of that void there, I'll say, and I was just trying to find, whatever it was that could kind of fill that, and I ended up, I've had 4 knee surgeries, I've had shoulder surgery, I've had a heart surgery, I've had hernia surgery. So I've always had, I was in and out of surgeon's office quite a bit from the time I was 15 until I was, in my mid-20s. So I started getting prescribed Vicodin at the time, and again, didn't think anything of it. My perception of risk was super low because it was prescribed by a doctor. He said, if it hurts, take this. And I'm like, all right, cool. So I did that for a while. And I'll backtrack a little bit. So the first injury I had, I tore my meniscus, and it was on the basketball court. So I dove for a loose ball, twisted it, tore my knee, but I had a baseball trip planned for the next week. So we were going down to the Dominican Republic to play against some Dominican teams. And I didn't want to miss the trip, right? So I go to the doctor. He's like, yeah, you've torn it. He's like, if you can deal with the pain, then you can go. You can plan it. You're not going to hurt it any more than it already is. So I got a knee brace. He gave me some ibuprofen. I went down. We played a week's worth of baseball, doubleheader every day for 5 days straight against, some top competition. And then I came home, and that's when I had the surgery to repair it, and that was when I was first prescribed Vicodin. And it was after that that my mindset kind of shifted, like, oh, anytime I have pain, this works way better, so I'll take this. And again, didn't think anything of it because it was just prescribed by the doctor, so that's what he said, I should use.
So from someone on the outside that's never fallen into that trap of opioid addiction, how would you describe when it went from, because like you said, it's being prescribed by the doctor, you don't think it's much of a threat, you don't see that this could potentially turn into disaster. You're not looking at it that way. You're going, hey, I got a little bit of pain, I take this, it goes away, no big deal, right? When does it start to turn bad? How does it start to turn bad? Did you start to see the warning signs? And if so, how does your brain just deflect that? You know what I mean? And not be honest with itself, like, hey, we're kind of heading down a bad direction? Or do you not even process those thoughts at the time because you're a young man? Just someone that's sitting on the outside, I'm always fascinated by that.
Yeah, so it's a combination of different things. So first, growing up, we were always like plastered with this idea of what an addict looks like, or what an alcoholic looks like. It always looks like that guy down asking, begging for change has got a sign out. Like, it can't be me, it can't be you, right? Like, that's not what an addict is. So there's no thought in my mind that I could become an addict, for one. And then to continue down that, when you're in the midst of it, you don't see the warning signs until it's almost too late. So it started that, I always had pills around, and I would take them when I had pain. And then it was like, oh, I remember that feeling, and that felt good. And I'd get home from school and be like, yeah, I'm just sitting here playing video games, so let me, I'll grab a pill. It makes me feel better. I didn't see it as like I was getting high, or I didn't see it as anything other than like, this makes me feel this way. I like feeling this way, so I'll do that. And then as I went away I got off into college, it kind of, like, people think that like the opposite of addiction is sobriety, and that's not necessarily the case. The opposite of addiction or dependency is connection. So if you don't have anything that you're connected to, then you will start to connect to things that make you feel good and give you that instant gratification. And when I went away to college, I went away to Eastern Michigan. I didn't have any of my friends there with me, so I went in blind. I got a roommate that I didn't know. I had a girlfriend at the time, and obviously she was long distance, she was away, so I felt very isolated. So I started to reach for things that would make me feel better. I was partying, I was doing all the things that I thought a college person should do. And it just slowly progressed from there, where I would take pills maybe, once, twice a week, and then it was, okay, I'll take them a little bit more, and then I would come home on the weekends, and we'd just party like crazy, and then it would, I started to notice maybe a year or two into college that, like, I'd come home almost every weekend, and we would, I would, go hang out with my friends and do whatever, and then when I would get back to school, I noticed I wouldn't feel as well, right? And I'm like, oh, that's kind of weird, right? And I didn't really put two and two together that I was becoming dependent on the opioids that I was taking the majority on the weekends. Like, it was my party drug at the time. Like, that's what I used. Instead of drinking a bunch, I would do that. So it slowly evolved to, all right, now when I get back to school, I notice I'm not feeling well. What makes me feel better? Okay, I'll take a couple more pills. And that really was the first time that I ever understood, like, withdrawals. So I'd get back to school, and I'd have class on Monday, and I'd go to bed, and I'd wake up for class on Monday. I'm like, nah, I'm not going, right? And then Tuesday would roll around, and I noticed that I wasn't doing anything. When I was at school for those 4 days, Monday through Thursday, I was in my room, eating fast food, not doing anything, and it was just because I was depressed, and I was going through withdrawals every single week that I would go back up there. And it wasn't until I'd get home on the weekends, and I'd have, I'd start using again, and then that cycle started to continue until I had to use every day.
So really, it ties into the fact that you're almost relating happiness and the way that you feel to that feeling that you're getting from those opiates. And now when you're not feeling that, you're in like a broken down state. You're losing your motivation. You're not giving your best in all your other endeavors. And you're probably not consciously admitting to yourself that like this is what's consuming me or what my main focus is becoming. You're just kind of like, why don't I feel that way? What's going on here? What's wrong with me? I must be tired from partying this weekend. You probably try to cover it up with a lot, and were you surrounded in an environment where everybody else was doing it too, or were you one of the only people?
So there was some people that I would do it around. There was other people that didn't really know what was going on. It was just like, it was my buddies, and that, we would all had, whatever we did, and we'd hang out and just have a good time.
Now, was it always Vicodin? I mean, because I don't really know the genre at all. Was it always Vicodin, or are there many substitutes for this?
So it started off, it was always some type of Vicodin or something along those lines. And towards the end of my using, it was oxycodone. So I was, it was more potent. And a lot of times what people do is they get to that point and it's really, really expensive to kind of maintain that habit. And they know that the least expensive alternate to that would be heroin. So a lot of times people in that situation end up going and turning to heroin, not because they're like, oh, using heroin sounds really fun today. It's because I know the feeling that it's going to give me, and it's almost an economic decision. Like, it's cost me less. This is how I'm going to maintain my habit for now. I don't care what I've been taught my entire life, that heroin is bad. I've been using these pills for this long, and I haven't really had much consequences, so why would this have any different consequences?
That's what I was about to ask. I was about to ask because to me, heroin is like the devil. Like heroin is something that from the time we were children, you were told was like an absolute, you will get addicted, you will destroy your life. You'll be like, if you wanted to stereotype what a heroin addict looked like, we would have, we would expect a very negative image of a human being, but yet somehow that transition takes place for a lot of people. And is it, in that world, is heroin spoken about differently? Like, because from the outside world, people look at heroin as like the lowest level. Like, if you're ready to kill yourself, heroin can be a part of your life. But if not, you need to avoid that type of shit. But in the world that you were in, does it become like not so much of a bad thing? Because the way you just said that, the way you were like, I'm already doing this, it's almost just a financial decision. In my mind, those, even though they're probably similar, the prescription drug from the doctor versus heroin off the streets, to me, is a massive leap. Did it seem like that at the time? And did you ever venture into the heroin world?
So I didn't know. I was given it one time. I didn't know what it was. A buddy of mine told me that it was morphine. It was just crushed up. And I was like, oh, okay. I didn't know anything different. And then another friend of mine saw that, and he's like, what the hell are you doing, man? Like, that's heroin. And I was like, okay. And I was like probably 16 or 17. So I knew, like, hey, don't do that again, right? I know that's bad. And I think because I had still a really good support system around me, I had really good friends around me, we may not have been doing the best things, but we cared about each other's well-being. And I knew that if I were to say to one of them, like, oh yeah, I'm going to go try heroin today, that it would not have went over well. So I think I still had that type of support system, so I didn't end up. But a lot of times it's a few people that are using together, and they're using Oxycontin or whatever opioid their choice is, and it just becomes so expensive that they're like, well, maybe we'll try it, right? And then you try it once and you don't have consequences. I'm sure you went through like a DARE program or something similar to that growing up, right? And they tell you about like the gateway drug and how these things are gateways to different things. We think about it a little bit differently, where it's more like that gateway process, right? So you try one thing, and say it's alcohol or it's weed or whatever it is, and you try it and you're like, everybody told me this stuff was really bad, and I've tried it now, and it wasn't that bad, and I didn't really have these consequences. So what else did other people say is bad that may not be as bad as they're saying, right? And then you try the next thing because somebody has it or whatever, and you try that and you're like, oh, that's also not that bad. I don't really have these immediate consequences, right? Because when you're young, you don't look at the long-term consequences. You look at what's immediately happening. I did this on Saturday. Sunday was fine. I'm probably all right. You don't think that I did this in January and now it's December and I've been doing this every weekend and now it's become a problem, right? So that's kind of how that process evolves into doing more things that you wouldn't necessarily have done otherwise.
And you're right. There's something dangerous about the fact that, I mean, growing up, they clumped in, weed and alcohol and this and the DARE program all into like one thing, whereas some were probably driven by propaganda, some was driven by all kind of things, right? You know what I mean? Like, look at the different, perspective on weed nowadays versus when we were growing up. Like, if you were a pothead, you were considered like a loser when I was growing up, and only like the bums did that type of stuff. And nowadays it's like everywhere. It's through society. It's getting legalized everywhere. People realize it can be a recreational drug. There's health benefits to it. So you're right about the fact that if you bought into the story on that one side, and all of a sudden that story starts getting shattered, and you go, that's not real. Next thing you know, you venture into psychedelics, and then you venture into this direction, and then you're going like, maybe they're wrong about heroin too. And life is like, surprise, motherfucker. Like, heroin is still really bad.
It is. Yeah.
It's amazing that you dodged that bullet, because I've had two people that have done heroin that have been on this podcast, and they both talk about it like a lifelong battle that they don't think they'll ever fully escape. Like, from one time, that experience is so powerful to them that there's now always like a little devil on the shoulder being like, hey, you should do this again. You know what I mean? And that's wild. I can't comprehend that type of, struggle that lasts every day through all obstacles of life. No matter where you're at, you can be happy, successful, good business, relationships going great, and yet you'd have this little thing whisper in your ear like, hey, you should come do this again. That's an incredible thing.
And it is. It's super powerful. But I think that, like, so people that struggle with substance use disorder, and I think our brains are more hypersensitive to the pleasure center than other, I'll say normal people's brains are, right? So I spell it out this way when I talk about it sometimes, is that, like, our brains are really good at remembering pathways to what made us feel good. So, like, I'm super hypersensitive and know that, like, if I do A, B, and C, then I get this feeling. And anytime we are going through something that makes us uncomfortable, our body says, okay, I'm uncomfortable. What can I do to not feel uncomfortable right now? And it remembers those pathways very easily because we're so hypersensitive to it. So when you've had that before and you know that that's an immediate, I'll say, fix to whatever it is you're going through, then you're like, okay, in the back of your mind, you're always like, well, I know this worked at one point. And through my recovery and throughout my journey, I've obviously found way more coping mechanisms and way more things that provide value into my life, that I don't need to turn back to those things anymore. And it's not like a devil on my shoulder that I'm fighting every single day. It's just not part of my life anymore because I've established those new pathways.
So you really feel like you've completely broken free from just any type of dependency on that shit. Like, you don't have the desires anymore. You've stepped away. It has no more control over your brain at this point? Or do you think that there's still some aspect that you have to be conscious about, but you've come a long way enough that you're like, I'm good. I'm in a place where I know I'm not going to fall back into those patterns and routines?
So I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm like cured, right? But I know that through like drugs and alcohol, those don't have any power over me anymore. I don't turn to those things when I'm in pain or when I'm struggling with anything. But all the other character defects that I have, whether it be fear or insecurity or gluttony or any type of any other thing that makes me feel good immediately, I absolutely struggle with those things on a daily basis. So it's just changed forms, and we find a different toolkit to deal with those things. So now I know if I'm feeling fearful, or if I'm feeling anxious, or if I'm feeling like, oh, I just want to pig out right now. Like, those are the things that I turn to now in my when I'm not feeling as strong as I should.
So before we start telling the story about you launching your own business and all the cool things that you're doing now, let's talk about what were some of the worst times that you got to that made you finally realize it was time to make change. Like, I'm always fascinated by when people flip a switch. You know what I mean? Because sometimes it takes a lot for people. Some people lose everything in their lives. Some people lose very little and they make a change. But I'm always fascinated by, like, what was it that finally made you go, I got to head a new direction? Like, the direction that I'm going will not yield the future that I'm looking for.
Yeah, so I mentioned I was away at college, coming home every single weekend, and finally I was at Eastern Michigan, so it's about an hour away from where I was living at the time. So I made the decision, like, I'm just going to commute. So I was living at home, commuting to school, and a lot of times I just wouldn't like when I was in the thick of it, I just wouldn't go away to school. Like I'd leave my mom's house where I was living, and I would just go to my buddy's house for 4 days, and then I would come home on Thursday or Friday. Like, yeah, I'm home for the weekend, right? I don't know if my mom knows that, but she does now, and so like that was when it really started to spiral out of control. And I was fortunate, like I still had got like really good internships in school. I was good at keeping up the facade. Like, oh, don't worry, I'm still doing really, really good. And I hid it from everybody very well, except for like my super close friends. So I was, you know, in and out of jobs. You know, I'd keep a job for a little while, then, you know, I'd lose interest or stop trying as hard. I'd get let go from a job. And I totaled a lot of cars through my addiction. And, you know, so I had the consequences, but I didn't really want to like face them. I was really good at like avoiding the consequences. You know, like I totaled a car and I was under the influence. And so, you know, I got charged with what's called super drunk at the time, where you're over twice the legal limit. And went to court for it. Ended up paying for, you know, a decent lawyer and got got that reduced. So I didn't really have any consequences from there. And like little things like that might have made me look at the situation a little differently, I just kind of kept avoiding them. And it wasn't until so I mentioned earlier I had two older brothers, and I was home from school and most of the time just isolating in my room. So I'd come home, you know, from whatever I was doing, I'd just go into my room, I'd sleep until 11 or 12 o'clock, I'd leave to go get more pills, I'd come back home, do the same thing, rinse and repeat. My brother had just moved out, he was living on his own, and I remember I was kind of like half asleep, and he texted me like, hey man, you home? And I I didn't respond. I remember waking up and looking at my phone and seeing it, and I'm like, oh, I'll talk to him later, no big deal. So I put the phone down, go back to sleep. And it wasn't maybe 2 or 3 days later, I was out at the job site working. I was installing pools at the time. And my boss kind of looks at me like panic. He's like, you need to call your brother, you know? And my phone was in the car, so my family had called him. So I get to my car, and I had like 17 missed calls from my mom and my brother. I was like, oh, this is a little weird. So I called home. I called to my brother, and he had told me that our other brother, Kyle, had died by suicide. So that was like a big kind of wake-up call, or it should have been kind of a wake-up call to look at my life and what was going on. Not that like my brother was in the thick of an addiction, although, you know, he drank and smoked some weed and he had a good time, but none of us knew like what he was going through. And none of us really were aware of the severity of, like, he had just graduated his paramedic license, he had gotten his firefighter certification, like he was interviewing a department and was super close to getting a job, and then, you know, just something like that happens and it really, you know, wakes you up. And I wish I could say like that was the catalyst that made everything better, but it didn't. I continued to get worse from that point because I had this excuse to use, and I was like, well, you know, I'm in pain and this is what covers up the pain. So I just continued using for several months after that. That happened in May of 2012. And then finally in September, so I was, again, in my room where my normal spot was, and my mom came upstairs and she had a piece of mail. And it was a bunch of bounced checks from my bank account. And she's like, what's going on here? Like, why did you bounce like 4 different checks out of your bank account? And I couldn't think of a lie that would make sense. Like everything in my life at that point was just a lie and was smoke and mirrors. And I was just like, I was like, I've been using, you know, and up to this point, she had no idea what I was doing. She told me after the fact she thought I was gambling because I never had any money. But she had no idea that I was using, and I told her that, and she's like, all right, you know, my mom's always like super on top of, like, whenever something's going on, she's all over it and will, you know, figure out a solution to whatever's going on. She put herself through college while she was operating a business, and while my dad was sick, she graduated with a master's degree so she could change careers and go into teaching. She's founded a charter school now. She's a super high achiever and a phenomenal asset in my life, and is always there for me. And so what she did, she, you know, called around to different rehab places and got me into rehab 2 days later. And so I was there for 21 days. I got out of treatment, and again, wasn't necessarily ready to stop using. So I was back at her house, kind of back into the same exact routine. And it wasn't more than a week later that I started using again. But what I did when I got out of treatment, so everybody, like, it's everybody in treatment's like, you know, when you get out, you got to make sure you go to a meeting, you got to find a sponsor, you got to do X, Y, and Z. And what I was always good at was going through the motions and making it seem like I was doing everything that I was supposed to be doing. So I got out of treatment, went to a meeting, I got a sponsor, and I mean, by the grace of God, I had surrounded myself with people in a way that I had a little bit of a support system. So what I was going to a sober living house and hanging out with the guys there because I knew some of them through high school. So we were hanging out there, and I went to a meeting while I was high, and people could tell, obviously, when you're in that kind of company. So when I went to go to the 3-quarter house the next day, they're like, "Hey, man, you got to take a drug test to come here." And I was like, "What?" They're like, "Yeah, if you want to hang out here, we got to make sure that you're sober." And so I was like, "Okay," I was like, "I'm going to fail, so there's no point in drug testing me." They're like, "It's all right, things happen." They're like, "Your mom already knows, so go home, talk to her, and then we'll see you at the meeting later on tonight." And I was like, "Okay." So I got home, I get in the kitchen, where I'm sitting there on the computer, I'm like, "Mom, I know that that I messed up and I used." And she looked at me, she goes, "What?" And she had absolutely no idea. But I walked in and told on myself, right? And so she was heartbroken, obviously. She had just gone through, everything with Kyle in May, and then I finally get out of treatment, and, I'm supposedly doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and I wasn't. And I'd broken her heart again, and I could see the look and the pain in her eyes. And it was the same pain that she had going through everything with Kyle and just a few months before that. And to know that, like, I was causing that pain, like, right in front of her, and to know that, like, I was pretty much the sole reason for that, it really was one of the catalysts that kind of started to change my direction. And to know that, that was the first time I really saw what my addiction was doing to other people. And so right after that, I moved into the 3-quarter house. Instead of just hanging out there, I actually went to live there, and I lived there for about a year. And that was September 30th, 2012. I haven't used any drugs or alcohol or anything since then. It's been everything's been uphill since that point, but it was definitely a lot of there's definitely trials and tribulations throughout recovery too, and there's been some hard times, but the majority of my life has been on an upward trajectory since then.
Man, that's an incredible story. I had no idea about your brother. Suicide is one of the most devastating, helpless things in the world because, like, there's just no solution. There's nothing you can do, no matter how bad you desire to see somebody again or talk to them again or anything like that. It's a permanent thing, you know what I mean? And suicide's rocked my life hard. I don't know if you know my background, but it's one of the hardest things to deal with because, like, that pain will never be gone because you can just never even just see that person again. You know what I mean? It's like what you would trade for one day to just see that person and be able to talk to them and tell them you love them. And you know what I mean? It's like people that haven't had their lives rocked by suicide will never understand that feeling. But the fact that you went through that while battling an opioid addiction, while watching your family struggle with all these things and still got your shit together is impressive, man. I mean, most people would have been driven to an absolute zero at that point. You know what I mean? And who knows if they ever build back up. That's a crutch that you could hold on to for the rest of your life. Or it's something that you could use, like you said, as a catalyst to say, now it's time to just do better. It's time to be better for me, for my family, for my future, for my brother. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what your religious beliefs are, but we don't know if there's a chapter 2 or not. But if there is, and there is some form of, like, life beyond this existence, you can take solace and pride in the fact that you know that your brother would be very proud. You know what I mean? Like, because life is tough at times, and life, when you're down, not a lot of people want to be there for you. Like, that's one of the worst things that you have to almost go through to realize. Like, no matter how many friends you have, no matter how many people like you or how popular you are or any of these things, man, when you're down, life just beats the shit out of you until you decide to fight back. Yeah. Like, until you decide that, like, I got to get my shit together. Life just does not care. I always joke around and tell guys in here, it's like an MMA fight, but there's no ref. So if life is beating your ass, like, if you don't do something about it, it's just going to continue to beat on you until you finally either quit and break and you're done with this thing, or you just start fighting back. And now I want to get to a little bit of the better parts of your story because you're a man that's doing it. So there's a lot of people that'll listen to podcasts and stuff like this searching for inspiration because when you hit those bottoms, you just can't see the light yet. And you don't start to see the light until things really start to come together. You know what I mean? how many speakers have talked about it forever? You almost just take baby steps and you just focus on going forward. And like, you don't even know where you're going to end up. You don't know what the future is going to look like. You just have this like blind faith that might be ignorant at the time, but you're like, you know what? I'm going to try to make things better than what they are. And now you're getting there. Now the man that sits across from me today in 2021 has his own business, you bring energy into the room, you have that good spirit again. But that's a battle to get to there. So when do you think you were at least at a point where when you started to look around and you reflected back, you started to go, you know what, like things are getting better. Life is getting better. Like there'll always be this pain here or these things, or I look back and I wish I could have done A, B, or C, but like my life's on a good track right now, and let's talk about that build up. Did you find relationships in your life that were pivotal to your growth? Did you find people that you really took faith in and they were a strong part of your support system? And then let's start to talk about the successful side of your story, because I hope that a lot of people out there listening, when you're in that rock bottom, like you don't even have to see the future, you just got to move forward. And if you do that, it's there for you. And one day, like Steve Jobs said in his famous commencement speech, like you can't ever see dots looking forward, but when you look back, you'll know those pivotal dots that led you to being where you are. You know what I mean? Like he says, his exact quote was like, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you just have to have faith that the dots will line up in your future. And that's like the best advice you can give someone. Yeah. It's like, man, we don't know. But if you put one foot in front of the other and you have faith in the potential and the possibility, like we were talking about before this podcast, it can happen. And you're now proof of that. And many other people that have rebuilt their lives from zero are proof of that. So let's start talking about the good parts of the recovery.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I was in a sober living house, and we started. I was super active and still am super active in a 12-step program. So within that program, you surround yourself with people that are going through the same thing, that have struggled with the same stuff that you struggle with. And I remember like one of the first meetings I went to, everybody goes around the table and shares and just kind of talks about like what's going on with them. And I remember it was the first time feeling like, holy crap, like I thought I was the only one dealing with these feelings and these emotions, and 6 people have shared with all the exact same stuff that I'm going through. So it helped me connect with a new network of people. It also was, so the high school that I went to kind of struggled with an opioid problem quite a bit. And so...
Say the nickname before the podcast.
So when I was in school, they called it heroin high. So it's obviously evolved from that name now, but the first meeting I went to, there was 10 people all at the same table as me, all kids that graduated within a year or two of me. So we're all going through the same thing, and I mentioned, it's a close-knit community. We try and lift each other up. I had a lot of good friends that, were there while I was using, and when I got sober, they were still there, like, hey, man, how can we help? They called me as soon as I got out of treatment. Nothing changed. I just wasn't drinking or using anymore. They cared about me as a person, and the ones that were there for me, I valued that quite a bit. So you just start to surround yourself with new people, and surround yourself with people that are doing the things that you want in your life. You're like, oh, that guy, he's got early on it's a lot of the material things, like, oh, he's got a nice car, and he's got what looks like new clothes, and a nice pair of shoes. Like, it'd be nice to have that. So you start surrounding yourself with people, that seem like they're doing those things. And then, as you connect with them and you have those deep conversations, you can start to see the people who are actually doing it and who are just, kind of going through the motions. And you start to connect and build a tribe of people around you that really that are trying to help others, that are trying to build themselves up, that are just want the best for them and those people that they come in contact with. And throughout that journey, I've connected with a ton of people that are all kind of just trying to do these same things that we're doing and trying to better our lives and trying to have that vision of like, how many people can we lift up with, the businesses that we're building, or how many people can we help just by giving a little bit of our time back. One of the awesome things that came out of my high school, so while we were in school, an organization was started. We had lost a couple people from overdoses while I was there. And a lot of community members got together because they just wanted to do something, right? They were like, we don't like that this happened. Like, what can we do to help? And it was before people really talked about it in the open as much as it is now. And the group was formed. It's called Families Against Narcotics. I started going to some fan meetings right when I got sober, and actually was just recently elected to be the president of the board for the organization just a few weeks ago. And the organization was founded because people were struggling, and we wanted to be able to provide some resources and connection and to be able to help people. And so at this point, it started as a grassroots organization. We've been around since 2007 now, and the community programs that we've been able to launch. So the first program was just like a monthly forum that was a place for people to go to. If I can get this to open, I got some stats on here.
Probably got a face idea.
So the first thing that we did was monthly forums. So it was a place for people to go where you have community members, you have people in recovery, you have like parents and family members that are struggling with somebody who's either still in their substance use, who has gotten sober. You have police officers and judges and everybody coming together in the same room, all trying to come to a common solution and just provide support for people. We've expanded quite a bit to the point where we have over 20 chapters across the state. And we're just continuing to grow in that way. We also launched a program a few years ago called Hope, Not Handcuffs. And what that program allows you to do is to go to any participating police station. You walk in there, you say, I'm struggling, I need help. We send an angel down to that police station. They sit with you, they go through, they get your info, and we get you into a treatment center. So we have 86 participating police stations right now in Southeast Michigan. There's 27 of them that we have in New York as well. Another company saw that, or another organization saw what we were doing. They're like, we love it, we want to be able to launch it. It all started from it's called the Gloucester Project in Massachusetts. So they were the first ones that came up with the like police-assisted addiction recovery. So we met with them and we're like, we want to launch this locally, and we call it Hope, Not Handcuffs. And we've put over 5,200 people into treatment in the past few years just through this program alone. And we've been able to continually expand from there. We now have what's called a quick response team. So when somebody overdoses, we have a group of, there's a police officer, somebody in recovery, and then the people in the organization are going to be mad for me butchering this, but it's a group of people that go to the house where the person overdosed, and we offer them resources and support. We've placed several people into treatment right from there. We give resources to the family. We let them know, where they can go, where they can get help. We do naloxone training every single month, and we give out thousands and thousands of naloxone kits. And for those of you that don't know, naloxone is basically an anti-overdose drug. So if you find somebody that's overdosing, you give them the naloxone, and it brings them back. So we bring that in. We give it mostly to the families that have kids who are struggling, or sober living houses and all the places that you wouldn't necessarily think that you would need it, but when you do, we have it there, and we have people trained to use it. So we're continuing to expand. We do big fundraisers and stuff every year, but it's just been an honor to be a part of the organization and to be able to see the growth that we've had thus far, and to see where we're going moving forward. And it all started just from a little bit, just a small town high school and some people that wanted to help.
That's incredible. And it seems like the dialogue around opiate addiction and drug addiction in general is starting to change finally. Like, people are really figuring out, like, we need to help these people. These are good people from different communities across the country that need help. When we were younger, drug addicts were looked at in a very, very bad light. You didn't consider that could be your brother or, one of the best people that falls into a bad pattern or a bad routine. And now their lives are going down the drain. You know what I mean? And the conversation is changing. More people are going, we need to help these people, so that we have more people sitting here in the future in 10 years that are on the opposite side of the battle, that are making the world a better place. And I tend to find that people that have gone through darkness or struggle or helplessness or hopelessness or depression tend to be some of the best people I know at the end, man. I tell you what, once you've been in those dark bottom places, you don't want to see others there, because you know what it feels like. You remember that experience. You can relate to them on such a deep level that you're like, man, if I can help you out of there, I wish I would have had a hand out of there sooner. I'd love to help somebody else to get out of that place. Looking back at your story, is there anything that you think that you could have said to the younger version of yourself, or that you would tell younger kids now that are about to get into high school, that are going to face these difficult decisions and questions? Because like you said, you were operating from a perspective of like, oh, that's not going to be me. Like, everything's going to be good with me. I'm not going to ever fall into that pattern. Do you think there's any advice or information or resources that can be provided to the younger generation to make more people avoid these pitfalls? Or, is it almost just human nature that you're going to have people always wandering into these, and we just need to have very strong response teams, support systems, et cetera?
Yeah, so I get asked that question often, and I don't really have like a good answer for it. So it is, part of it is like if you tell somebody, hey, don't do that, their curiosity is immediately going to be like, well, why? Why shouldn't I do that? Let me learn for myself, especially young people that are learning and trying to figure themselves out. But I think we're doing a lot as far as the prevention goes, as far as education and getting young people the knowledge to know, like, hey, this is possible. This could happen to you. And these are the things to look out for. Yeah, you may try it. We hope that you don't, but there's going to be some people that try it, and here's the risks by taking that. So you take away the ignorant excuse, right? Like, oh, I didn't know that it could do that. Well, you know now, right? And you have the information, and it's being plugged into your mind from the time you're, in even 6th, 7th, 8th grade as you go into high school. Like, you have the information. So if you're making those decisions, know that there are consequences of those decisions. We don't judge anybody for the decisions that they make, it, especially if they end up struggling with something. We're here to support you. Yeah, you made some mistakes along the way. That's okay. We all make mistakes. Let's figure out what to do to get you back on the right track.
And really, if they're coming in contact with you, they're at the point where they're able to admit to themselves, like, there's a problem here. You know what I mean? And that's a huge thing. Like, I always tell people, I'll see people even in this gym that are really upset or depressed about something. I'm like, man, just the realization that you're looking at your actions or your lifestyle or something and saying, like, this is not what I want. This is not who I am. This is not what I'm meant to be. That's a really positive thing. Because you could spend another year in that place making those decisions, being that person, and then you're going to look back and go, why didn't I get my shit together sooner? So I feel like a lot of times people are so afraid to admit they have a problem or admit that they're, not living up to the standards by which they set, or that the expectations of the people around them, their mothers and their fathers, and that almost keeps them in the pattern longer. We need to let people know that, like, man, having courage to step up and come forward and be like, hey, I need some help. And then finding a system through which you can, better your life. This is huge. This is courageous. You know what I mean? Because it's so much easier to just like shut the door to your room. No one else exists. You can live in that zone longer, and it probably becomes a comfort zone.
Absolutely.
It 100% becomes like a place that you're not being judged. You're not like, because you're avoiding the light. You're avoiding other people making analysis of you and saying, like, what are you doing? If you knew there was a documentary crew that was going to kick open your door the next morning and film the way that you were living, you'd probably get your shit together, because you don't want it to be exposed. But otherwise, you get into a bubble. Don't rock the boat type thing, like, everything's fine. I don't have a problem, until you finally have to step up. So now I want to step forward into the story of you became an entrepreneur, and that's something I've gone through, and there are a lot of ups and downs in that as well, man.
Oh, dude.
What made you make the first decision? Like, were you already working, it sounds like, in the construction field, and then you decided, like, hey, just how did you start your own company? Where did the vision come from? Let's talk about, from the ground up, how did that get built?
Yeah, so I went to I struggled through college, and then finally when I got sober, I was about 2 years sober when I finally graduated with a bachelor's degree from Eastern Michigan in construction management. So I had a background in construction. I've always loved building. I've always loved working with my hands. I gravitated towards those things because I found it challenging, and I was like, I love seeing something and saying, okay, how can I recreate that? How can I make that? So that was, I loved that area. So I went to school because I knew I couldn't swing a hammer forever, or at least I thought I couldn't swing a hammer forever. So I was like, I'll get a degree in it, and then I can be in construction, but not necessarily doing construction all the time. So then I went and worked, graduated. I got a job immediately out of college with an industrial construction company out of Livonia, and phenomenal company. It was a family-owned company. They've been around 40 years. It was an awesome company to be a part of, and they gave me a lot of responsibility early on, so I was able to learn and grow and really, find out what it is that I liked. But I found myself sitting behind a computer for 6 or 7 hours a day. And yeah, there were some really awesome big construction sites that I got to be on and be a part of. But I kind of just, like, when I really looked at it and saw, like, could I do this for the next 20 or 30 years? I just, like, deep down, I couldn't get with that. I loved what I was doing. It was a great company. It was nothing against what they were doing. It was just that necessarily wasn't for me. And when I was just trying to make some extra money. So I had a ton of debt when I got sober. And I was like, all right, let me just try and do some jobs on the weekend. I'll fix somebody's bathroom, or it was just whatever I could do to make some extra money to pay off my debt so I could become debt free. And so I started the company, and I just opened an LLC, and it was KJK Builders. So it was John Kalousdian was my brother, so I named it after him, just kind of keep his memory alive. And I thought, it might be just a fun thing, or, it might just be, something I use every once in a while. But it was just what I did at the time. And I was doing side jobs on the weekends and working a ton. I'd finish my day job, I'd go home and work on another job. And then every weekend I was working and just trying to make some extra money. And as I started to build that, you start to build a reputation with customers, and you start to just kind of grow that. And so I met my wife in like 2014, the end of the year. So I actually was dating a girl when I got sober. That relationship hit some rocks, and so we split up, and I moved back into my mom's house. And so I met my now wife, but I met her in like 2014, and like she was a big part of like the inspiration, the drive to not necessarily get out of debt, but like she kind of had her stuff together, and she was younger than me. So I was like, well, let me just see, it was a good relationship. It was the first relationship that I really had that had like a deep connection beyond just like the facade. Like it felt good. It felt.
And she was challenging you. She was almost like making you rise to the occasion and be a better version of yourself, or at least subconsciously you were being challenged in that way, because you see this younger woman who's got kind of her shit together, and you want to be the man that can, add value to the relationship as she's adding value to you emotionally. You know what I mean? So that I'm already intrigued.
so yeah, that was like she handled money really well, and that was something that I always struggled with. And I found Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover a while ago, and that really helped me kind of jumpstart everything. So while I'm building this side business, and our relationship's kind of developing, and I'm still working a day job, and things are finally starting to flow in a positive direction. Started a mastermind group with a couple of close friends of mine that was, we still meet every single week. And like that has definitely been a huge part of the growth that we've done as
You
well.
founded that in 2014, and you still meet every week in 2021.
Mm-hmm. It was 2016 when we started the mastermind group, but yeah, we started it, and we still, we meet. There's obviously weeks that we missed, because we're building our life, and they, the two other guys, they both have kids now. None of us were married when we started the group. All three of us are married. We've all bought our first house. We've all, sold our first house. And like, so it's a lot of cool stuff. I'm going off on a tangent right now because I'm getting excited.
No, I don't mind that. That's awesome. And I want to go off on any tangents you want, because this is good stuff. People need to do these type of things. You surround yourself with those people. Now look, you're getting the same results. You're married. They're married. You're killing it. You're getting your first place. You're selling your first place. You're upgrading. That's what people want and desire. A lot of people just don't have the roadmap for how to get there.
Yeah. So, I started the business as a side business, and then I realized I'm working on the weekend, and I can make as much in one weekend as I do in like 2 weeks or sometimes a month working for somebody else. Granted, the consistency is completely different, right? I don't know if I'm gonna have a job tomorrow, at least when I started it. So I was just doing side jobs, and then it kept growing, and I made a little bit of money and paid for the renovations on our house through that, my side jobs, and, got myself completely out of debt, and, started to really build, a business and not just something I do side jobs under. I had, early on, it was pretty much just like whatever somebody needed me to do. They're like, hey, I got this weird, I got a drywall patch and I need a threshold put in. And I'm like, I'm your guy. I'll do it. And then you start to hone in on the business, like what's, what makes sense to do as a business and not just because I'm capable of doing it. And so that's when I kind of started doing kitchens, bathrooms, and basements. And then we started another company called Detroit Decks. So I had a couple of people like, hey, can you build a deck? I'm like, yeah, it's carpentry, right? That's what we do. And really took a liking to it. I love being outside. I love, how quickly you can kind of get them done, and you go from a bare backyard into, this beautiful structure in a short period of time. So we launched that as well and started to kind of grow them simultaneously. And then my wife and I got married in 2018, September 14th, 2018. We got married, and then we really started to kind of talk. I'm like, I like what I'm doing. We're comfortable. She was working at the time, and we really had a lot of conversations. Like, if I'm going to give this a shot as my sole employment, like, I don't think there's any other better time, right? And we thought about it for a few months, and in February of 2019, I put in my 2 weeks notice, and I was like, look, I appreciate everything you've done for me, but I got to give this a shot. And I don't know if you've seen that like Steve Harvey video where he talks about it's just when he goes off on riffs when he's doing Family Feud, and he's like, there's a lot of times where you get to a point in your life and you just got to leap. He's like, you got to leap and just trust that you're going to land on your feet. And that's really what it was. Like, I was like, I'm going to give it a shot. Like, worst case, I end up right back where I am today. The bottom that I could hit from there wasn't that. It was, what 95% of people do, right? And there was nothing wrong with that. I didn't think it was for me, and I still don't. So went off in March of 2019. We, it was my sole form of employment, and started I hired a couple guys and started working together and getting jobs done, and we've ramped up. Last summer we had six people working. So this summer we're going to continue to grow, and revenues has just been increasing ever since then. We built 50 decks last year. And we're just continually, moving and trying to grow and evolve. And my wife got furloughed from her job during the pandemic, and it was actually ended up turning into be a blessing. She got unemployment for a little while, which was good. But then after that, I was able to bring her onto the company. And if I didn't have her there last summer, I mean, we were getting 5 or 6 estimates that I'd have to go on a day, and the phone was ringing off the hook. And like, she took all of that. She answered all the phone calls. She set up all my appointments for me. And she really, had she been working all the time, I just would have been pulling my hair out. And it's just weird how all of these things just kind of fall into place exactly at the time they're supposed to. When you have those feelings, and when you have that vision and those feelings of expectancy that this is the path that I need to be on. And no matter what roadblock is in my way, it's just a little hurdle you got to jump over, and you keep pushing and you keep seeing the way forward.
And you're willing to really fight for it because it's yours. There's something about when you're an entrepreneur, you will, when an obstacle comes, you will find a way around it because you're just all in. You know what I'm saying? It's when you're all into anything in life, there's a ton of potential for success. It's just most people never go all in on anything. You know what I mean? Because it is scary. It is scary to go all in on anything. But when you do, there's a different drive behind that, man. It's just like the fighter that has nothing to lose. A fighter that believes that man, I got nothing to lose. That's a dangerous person because they are all in. And it's exciting. And the name is brilliant. Detroit Decks, you're tying into the power of Detroit that everybody has strong feelings for. Detroit, when I see it, it looks incredibly professional. If you do a good job for your customers, that's just going to, continually build the business. And it's a great branding idea. That was one of the first things that I noticed when you said it because I couldn't see the actual label of your shirt. So I didn't even know the name of the company until you just said it. It's brilliant branding. I picture this mega company that does decks all over the state that, has a huge crew of guys that work for them. And that's the direction that you're heading. And, it's exciting to hear. And actually it's funny. Just recently, I brought my girlfriend on. Now she's our operations manager up front. She's running all of our front end stuff. And it's the same thing as during all this shifting and turning that took place, there just happened to be an opening. Our other girl just graduated from U of M and she just got hired at a local hospital. She was running our front end before. So now she has less time. Now all of a sudden it was just working out. The pieces fell in line. My girl's like, hey, I can step up and learn that. Now she's crushing it there. She's handling all the appointment schedules. She's taking all of our phone calls. She's doing follow-up with customers. She's registering people. She's doing guided tours. She's doing everything here. You know what I mean? And it worked out in just that same way. Whereas before she had bounced around to a couple different things. And, it's neat how in life, if you just create a vision, some people say they manifest their future. Some people believe that there's this universal pull towards what you want. Whatever it is, it works. That's all I'll say. Believe in whatever you want, but the people that don't think they can accomplish things in life don't. And the people that do believe that they can do things do. believe in whatever you want. That's just the reality of it. So many people, if they would just subscribe to that style of thinking, they're like, man, I can make a future that I want to live in. I just have to seek it out. I have to be relentless. I have to admit my mistakes and learn discipline and like level up. Because like I'm sure you can agree with this as a business owner. Like what I thought I was doing 2 years ago, like, oh man, I'm really doing great. Like I'm on top of my stuff. I know my business. I wasn't even scratching the surface to what I'm doing now. You feel that way too?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You don't know what you don't know. And you're just doing what's right in front of you and you're just trying to keep the wheels going. And then you start to surround yourself with people who are, 4 or 5 steps ahead of you. And you're like, holy crap, I got to step my game up. I really got to push and try a little bit harder. I got to put a little bit more effort in here. I really got to start, doing the thing instead of just being in the business. You have to work on the business.
It's funny because like I said, when you're in the world, like I remember 5 years ago, I was like, man, like I'm crushing it. I can't be any more efficient. Like I'm really like, I thought like I had it together. And I look back at myself now from this perspective. I'm like, you weren't even scratching the surface of your potential on your efficiency, on your vision, on your, and having your dream come to fruition makes life incredible. It turns it from like, earlier in my life and probably the same to you, life at some points feels like this incredibly depressing movie that you're just like, why me? Like, why is this happening to me? Why do I deserve this? Like, and then you lose, like, at least I did for a while, I lost value in life. Like I just didn't care about anything. I didn't give a shit about what the future may or may not have in store for me. And like, yeah, when you live through that and now you have an alternate life, it's almost like a different movie, like, or a completely new chapter where you're crushing it and your dreams coming to life and you got great people around you and you're investing heart and soul in, and then you're getting back tenfold. That's honestly the beauty of this crazy fucking thing that we call life. It's like, it is this roller coaster that we're all on, and the potential exists for all of us, but not everybody like just goes for it. You know what I mean? So, man, this is a great story. And I really hope a lot of people tune in and listen to this. And, like, do you have a website for Detroit Decks? I want to shout out all this.
Yeah, so we're at DetroitDecks.net and KJKBuilders.com. Both of our websites. You can see all of our work. We're on Facebook, Instagram, the whole nine. You can see all of our work on there, a lot of pictures of stuff that we do. And, yeah, you can get an idea of what we are as a company.
100%. And we, in my opinion, we need to support a lot of these small businesses and a lot of people that are out there just putting their heart and soul on the line for their companies and for their customers, because like the big people aren't going anywhere. Like Amazon's going to be cool. Like they're not stressed at all. Okay. Walmart's not going anywhere. All these mega companies are going to be fine. We need to find more good people within our communities that are out there trying to make the world better for themselves, for their customers, for their families, and support people like this. So anyone looking for a deck, please spread the word. DetroitDecks.net and KJK.
Yes.
Got it. Construction.
KJKBuilders.com.
KJKBuilders.com. Yes. Got it. But yeah, man, it truly was an honor having you on today. You have an incredible story, and I hope that you just keep crushing. I hope we do a follow-up a year from now and Detroit Decks has blown up and maybe you have multiple locations and tons of people and you're just crushing it. And, we go from there. So it was an honor having you in the studio today. You have an incredible story, and it's most impressive to me that you still live life with such good energy. You know what I mean? Because a lot of people that have gone through what you've gone through, they go down a different path, and then they're kind of just damaged and jaded forever. You know what I mean? And they don't really get their shit together usually for a long period of time, and not even a fault to their own. When you experience extreme pain like that and sadness and depression, life seems hostile.
It's tough, man. Yeah, it's tough to get back from that. And I just want to add one thing. So, have you read David Goggins' book, Can't Hurt Me?
No, I haven't, but everybody's talking about Goggins.
Well, Goggins he's awesome. But so one thing that he said in there was he's like, I don't know what happens in the afterlife. He's like, but I just envision myself like getting to the proverbial pearly gates and looking up, and they're like, you're David Goggins, you're this Navy SEAL ultra runner, blah blah blah. And he's like, I had this fear that like I would get there and I would see my potential and I wouldn't have lived up to that. And he's like, that's the fire that drives me. And it really resonated with me. I was like, like all of us have this potential that is just far and away larger than anything we can picture in our mind. Our mind knows what's right in front of us. And until we start to teach our mind that it has that vision, that there is that growth down the line, you start to have those feelings that, like, you know what, I'm going to be a multimillionaire, and I know that. And until you start to vision that and expand what you think you're capable of, then you're not going to live up to that potential. And so that's what you were saying, like the manifesting, like whatever it is you want to believe in, just believe that you can do it and push forward and keep imagining that.
Right before the podcast, we were talking about that. We were literally talking about how, the potential exists right in front of all of us. And it's just like the way that you think about yourself and the way that you think this world can be for you. And if you've gotten negative programming from society or people, or you weren't good enough when you were young, or you weren't popular, or this and that, you've already like kind of built a box around yourself. You did construction. You put yourself in a little box and you said, this is me. Mm-hmm. But really at the end of the day, like, you're just an evolving consciousness. So if you can start to look at yourself and say, there's definitely more that I can do. Mm-hmm. There's definitely more that I can be. I need to learn from people around me. I need to look at my life's experiences and take value from the tough times instead of taking it as like, this is the reason I need this crutch forever. Then life can unfold for you. And it's funny that you just brought up that David Goggins quote, because there was an original thing that resonated with me, that made me chase, that made me put in my 2 weeks and start this martial arts team in Brighton, Michigan, that 99% of people around me told me, like, dude, you're an idiot. Like in my early 20s, I was making $6,000, $7,000 some months. I was killing it. And everyone was like, this is going to be the biggest mistake of your life. Now, it was the best decision I've ever made, hands down. But I had this, I forget where I even read it, but it said, the only hell in life is meeting the person you could have become. And that just hit me so hard of like, oof, imagine laying on your deathbed and then two parallel universes. There was two James Grays or two Willies that went through this life experience, and you were able to meet the one that chased their potential and crushed it and had a beautiful life and family and just, squeezed all the juice out of this life experience, and versus the other person that closed the door to that room, that, took pills to numb the pain, that avoided healthy conversations that you didn't want to have, and all these things. Like, imagine if those two people could meet. You know what I mean? You would desire that life experience so bad. And all we have at the end of this thing is our experiences. And I've learned that as I've traveled and as I've seen the world and as I've witnessed. Like, I was just witnessed John. I've witnessed that man in his eyes just seize a moment and turn it to reality. And like, that stuff's invaluable. You cannot, I don't care how much money you have, how much fame or success, like, experience is like the gold standard of this life. You know what I mean? And you only get to those late experiences when you're being an elite human being. So truly, like I said, my honor today to have you in the studio. I hope you enjoyed yourself. And, I hope the company keeps blowing up. I'll put a link to your website when we put this podcast up, and we'll get it to the world.
I appreciate it, man. It's been an honor just being here. So thanks for having me, man.
No problem at all. We'll wrap